Hello, everybody. This is Annette Timmerman with GSG. We are here with Ivan Cascio of Magna from, he covers the Americas. He is our business management and development. So I'm going to turn it over to him and we will get started. I think Ivan would like to an interactive session. If we need to do something to get everyone else involved, I believe you can to come in with your audio and video and ask questions. So let's get started.
Yeah, hello everybody. So the way it was presented to me originally was it to be completely interactive, like starting with questions, comments, you know, whether you're an experienced water-based printer or someone that is basically just wanting to get started. I even purchased a drop of water-based ink yet. Really, it's to kind of have an open forum as to where everybody's at today. As my explanation was about this presentation, with water-based printing, it really is an ABC approach to getting started. For typically in the Americas, whether that be North American or Latin America, water-based is relatively new and very little experience about water-based ink. For the people that dabble in water-based ink, it's typically Discharge. Other types of water-based inks out there, such as high solids, some of you heard. But really, before you even go into a high solids, which is very rare for the USA market, and even for the Latin American market, it's better for someone to understand the basics of water-based before taking those steps. So I do have a preset presentation that explains what's needed to get started with water-based we can cover. But as the organizer asked, we really want it to be dynamic and as far as having a lot of participation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick this off with just asking people if they want to start with some basic comments of their experience or with water-based, whether they're saying I'm new, and that's the comment, or I have some experience, or I'm having this issue. We'll just take the next 2 or 3 minutes or even 5 just with some comments. There should be a button in and around the area that allows you to comment through video or voice. Does anybody want to start off with some comments, some questions, just to kick this off? If there isn't that many comments or questions, what I'll do is I'm just going to pop into a straightforward presentation that takes an ABC approach for basic water-based printing. But before I do that, let's kind of get some feedback as far as where everybody's at today for those who are participating in this presentation. Would anybody like to start? Anybody, whether through chat, moderation panel, there should be a button at the top. Okay, we got, I think, I got one question through chat that I saw pop up. Thank you very much from Doug. What are the advantages of water-based over plastisol printing? Very good question. And I can attack that from 2 perspectives. One is the obvious. The obvious is that the softness of the ink on the garment is superior to plastisol. So plastisol typically has this porous plastic surface that everybody's accustomed to. And like I mentioned before, water-based still dominates 90+% of the US market, okay? So when I talk about softness levels of water-based, that's the primary advantage of it. And typically what that means is your end users, they don't know what the ink is when they buy the shirt. So when they buy a Nike shirt or a shirt off a street vendor, what they're feeling on that shirt is, wow, that's soft. That's the key word, soft. And with that being said, that's the driver. That's what the market's going for. They want soft, soft, soft. So for those people who take the step of learning water-based, what I can tell you is they come back with the comments of, boy, my business is really taking off. And it's because my customers see the water-based print and they say, I don't know what this is, but this is what I want. Or they have customers come in with sample shirts they picked up from a market or from a competitor or what have you, walk them to the printer and say, I don't know what this is, but whatever you're going to print, it's got to feel like this. And so I think the quick answer to that is softness. That's your main driver. And because very little printers are using water-based, you just find yourself a niche market right off the bat. So the other advantage is compliance. You know, a lot of people are saying, I don't want plasticizers, or I need to be phthalate free. Some brands call it PVC free. So the compliance route is going down towards more of avoiding PVC and plasticizer and so on down the line. For instance, for those of you who heard of CPSIA, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, well, water-based is exempt. You know, it doesn't have plasticizers in it. So from a compliance perspective, that's also the advantage. Now, does that mean a lot to the big US market? Not really. You know, the US markets and your average customer, whether it be a school or whether it be a brand like Adidas or Nike, they just want soft. So I think that would be the best way to answer that question. Let me see if there's any other questions on there. For anybody who wants to join, there should be a share audio video button to ask the question live if you want. So let me see. One last question from Randy. Started homogenizing my own base back in the 80s, both regular and discharge, and adding pigments. How much has changed since then? Product safety, and let me just scroll back. Product safety and availability. So that's a good question. So if we look at water-based inks back in the 80s, your typical inks that were available at the time were exactly what Randy's mentioning. Your standard everyday water-based, which is meant for light colored fabrics only. So it's very runny because it's water, and you can make it yourself pretty much, blending water and some resins and some binders, and then basically adding pigment to it, and you're ready to go. But that's only for light colored shirts, you know, and that was very popular for printing tablecloths, tea rags, curtains, and what have you. But we know in the really textile screen printing market, printing on light colored shirts are less than 10%, if that. It's mostly dark colored shirts, which requires an underbase. Now, you can get away with something similar to your everyday water-based ink, which is basically Discharge ink, right? Which is an activated water-based ink that eats away at the dye. But although you can technically mix it yourself, the thing is with Discharge is you're minimized, or you're really minimizing your market to only 100% cotton shirts, and only those shirts that have dyes that react with the Discharge. Now, we know that in the market today, there's lots of polycottons and 100% polyester. So then that Discharge is not going to work on that. So how much has the market changed since then? Well, the market is really gravitating towards what's called high solid acrylics. Basically, what that means is it mimics plastisol. It looks and feels like plastisol, but much softer than plastisol, much smoother, much cleaner version than a plastisol market. So can you drop plastisol tomorrow and start with high solid acrylic? No. The quick answer is no. It's a learning process, and this is what this presentation is about. Will it be superior to a plastisol print? Without a doubt, it'll be much superior to a plastisol print. And that's why for those who want to take the time to invest and learn, they will find themselves with a niche market that very little competitors can gravitate to quick and easy. But it is a journey, and it's worth the risk of learning. Let's see. How does Magna handle over-dyed garments? Okay. Over-dyed garments typically need some kind of a bleed-resistant blocker, which we can talk about in a bit, as far as it's in the high solids family, which I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail, but it does need a bleed-resistant blocker. Again, what does that mean compared to a plastisol? Well, it'll look and feel like a plastisol, but with a much smoother surface than plastisol can ever give you. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but it does need a blocker. But it is possible to print over-dyed garments, and the benefit of water-based, we'll go back to question number one, a much smoother, softer surface compared with plastisol. We'll take one more, and then we'll kind of go into a step-by-step process of going into that. Any other questions through video or chat? And let me just scan real quick to see if I'm missing any other questions. Okay. Anything, Kurt or Annette, that you wanted to add to my comments?
No, you're doing well so far.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Bob Thompson. Let me go ahead and click.
Got him.
Bob, can you hear me?
I think it takes him a second to come up.
Bob Thompson, I don't know if I accidentally blocked you or if you clicked away, but if you want to try again, I apologize for that. All right. Bob, can you hear me? Okay. Well, let's go. I appreciate everybody's comments, and I think to take advantage of the time and just kind of make sure that everybody has a little bit of knowledge in water-based, what's needed, where we're at, what needs to be done. I think let's take it from a ground level, and then I'm not going to go too deep into the products. I'm just going to take some really frequently asked questions as far as getting started with water-based, and we'll let the comments flow from there. Okay. And if anybody has a more in-depth comments about water-based, we'll go further in detail. But just with what everybody mentioned, let's go over some basics. Okay. So let me see. Why is this not clicking over? Okay. I'm not going to go over MagnaColours real quick. We were founded in 1978, 40 years experience in water-based inks and dyes. So really, that's our experience. Our quality is based on the amounts of years of experience that we have in our product. So I would say that not all products, water-based products, are made the same. It really is how easy it is to print. That's the advantage. Now, I can tell you ours is the best all day long, but that doesn't matter. It's about putting it on press and trying it. So regardless if it's Magna or anybody else's, please do your benchmark comparative so that your life and your production is much easier. It's not like plastisole, which they all kind of generally work relatively similar with minute differences. With water-based inks, there will be great differences in quality, all right? But it's all about putting on the press. So with that being said, if there's any technical issues or any supports, this is my contact information. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You can reach out to GSG, has great support services. If they ever need to follow up on it, they can contact me. But let's get started really. What is it do I need to know about getting started with water-based? Okay, I'm going to take 2 minutes to explain this. Now, if you want to go into water-based printing, then I'll tell you, whether it's for yourself or teaching the employees in the back, please use this analogy to explain the difference between water-based and plastisole. It's like a cell phone. There are Android users and then there are iPhone users, right? They both do everything the same. They take pictures, answer phone calls, emails, scheduling, everything, right? And it's the same thing with water-based and plastisole. They all work similarly the same. However, what if I were to take that iPhone user and give them an Android and vice versa? What do you think would happen? Well, they're going to be mega frustrated because it's not what they're used to, right? And so that's kind of what the mentality is that don't expect to go into water-based and have it drop in and work just like you work plastisole. That's the first thing you got to take off the list, that it will be different, even though it's technically the same. You're using the same mesh, the same screens, the same machine, and so on down. It's just you're going to handle it different. Okay. So rule number one: use the analogy when you're talking to your production staff out back. Please don't think it's the same. While it looks the same, it's not the same. Okay. And the key word is that it's a journey. So you're going to take small steps. Do not expect to transfer over to water-based in a week. You're going to have to take small steps to learn each step of the way in order to make a process to transfer to water-based ink, taking one job at a time. Any questions or comments about that before I go on to the next step, the next recommendation? Okay, so what's my next thing I want to look at? The next thing I want to look at is really what kind of a dryer do I have, right? And what we would recommend is we want to have something that has at least a 6-foot chamber dryer on it. you know, with preferably forced air. Now, can I have a small chamber dryer and no forced air? You can, but it becomes more complicated to cure the ink. Water-based is about water evaporation. Plastisol is liquefied plastic that basically melts onto a shirt. So it's all about hitting the melt point. With water-based, it's about water extraction. So if you have a short dryer, it's going to take you a long time for it to extract water. The belt speed would have to go very slow, or you have to run it through a few times. Now, again, if you're not set up for that right now, it's not that you cannot test water-based. You can. Just keep in mind it won't be as efficient as Plastisol. So you really want to start looking at your chamber size and your setup for curing water-based inks. Okay. If anybody has questions about that, let me know. If you're going to print water-based, you can get away with your standard water-based ink for light colored shirts or Discharge without having to use flashes. But if you're going to graduate after you learn the basics of water-based into high solids, meaning that you're going to use the smooth copy of Plastisol printing, you're going to need at least a couple of flashes or more. All right. So if you're going to do Discharge or standard water-based learning, or even just kind of calibrating your screens, calibrating your dryer temperatures, you don't need to know the flashes. You can you can buy your standard water-based inks, not high solids. But if you're going to go high solids, you're going to need some more flashes. What I would recommend after you feel that if you feel confident with your dryer temperature chamber size and you know you have enough flashes, then I would recommend getting involved into a Magna starter kit. The starter kit's relatively inexpensive. I believe it's about under $150, and it has basically all our core products ready to go to start one or two designs to get accustomed to. Now, why would I recommend that? Because the key and the number one factor for getting started with water-based printing is not the ink. It's getting the screens ready. You have to standardize your screens with water-resistant emulsion. This by far is going to be the most complicated step in printing water-based. Once you get over the hurdle of standardizing water-resistant emulsion screens that do not break down with water-based ink, the rest is smooth sailing. Okay, and if we want to talk about that, we can talk about that further. Anybody have any questions as to why, how, questions about screens? Okay. All right, any chat, any questions? Okay, so please, 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 before you if you're interested in getting started with water-based, really focus your time and your efforts working with GSG and their emulsion partners in order to get yourself calibrated with a proper stencil that will not break down with anybody's water-based ink. Because once you have that foundation of having water-based stencil resistant, you will be smooth sailing from there. What I will tell you is if you do not do that and you go to the production floor to sample or even to do a production job and the screen starts breaking down on you, you will be frustrated, your employees will be frustrated, and you'll never want to touch water-based again. So in a quick synopsis, if you feel that you have the right dryer chamber and the flashes, and go ahead and invest in a small amount for a starter kit in order to just start testing the stability of your water-based emulsion and avoid breakdown. Now, you really want to have it resistant anywhere between 300 pieces plus, and there are people that can do it 2,000 pieces without breaking down. And there's ways of doing that, whether through post-exposure or liquid hardeners. We can talk about separately, but really my point is this: make sure that you have your water-resistant emulsions very well established before going any further. Okay. Any questions or comments about getting started and the basics to get started?
Hey, Ivan, we have a question about screen tape to be used with water-based inks.
Yeah. That's a good question. To be honest, I couldn't give you a specific brand of screen tape that will resist water more than another. For the most part, I haven't seen a lot of ones that do not, but I know they're out there. But unfortunately, I don't know the specific brand. But for the most part, your standard well-known PMI tape or R tape and all those tapes, for the most part, hold up pretty well. But I'm sorry, I don't have a specific brand I can tell you. Okay. If you want to share more as far as what you're using and where it's breaking down, whether it's because it's in the inside of the screen or that you're actually blocking pinholes with tape and it's coming off, please share some more information. I can probably help you that way. Any other questions before I'm moving on? So just to recap, pinholes and registration marks. Okay, so if you're doing pinholes and registration marks, two things. Registration marks, typically, for the most part, people block them out with emulsion and they don't use them because they break down, because that water-based emulsion or however you blocked it off starts pulling it down. So they use a tri-lock, but there is ways of going about it. You can use probably a stronger tape, like polycon tape or something like that, to block it out, more than just maybe a very flimsy masking tape or packaging tape. Pinholes, it goes back to the stencil question. Calibrating your exposure time, making sure you have the right EOM, making sure you have the right emulsion that can resist water-based. It goes back, Jeff, that's the pinholes is going back and calibrating your screens. If you spend the fair amount of time before getting involved with the ink on just calibrating your stencil and that screen, working with your distributors such as GSG and their emulsion vendors coming in and calibrating all that for you, the rest will be smooth sailing. The biggest obstacle is getting the screens correctly. That's the biggest one. All right, let's move forward. So the next thing, understanding, sometimes I could talk too much, so Annette, please keep an eye on the time for me, but I'm just gonna go over the basics, okay? I'm gonna touch the fundamentals of water-based ink. And again, getting started, I gave you the fundamentals getting started, but then what does water-based ink really mean, okay? Now, regardless of anybody's brand, right? There are 3 types of chemistry with water-based. There is low solids, medium solids, and high solids. What does that mean? So if we look at the water-based ink that the US market is very familiar with, it's called low solids. And that's what Randy was mentioning. Your everyday run-of-the-mill transparent water-based ink that prints on light-colored fabrics, right? And discharge. And basically what that means is that if we look at the solid content, that means the resin, the binders, all the additives that have a physical state, right? Like a powdered state. That's very low. The rest is all water. Yeah. And what that gives you is the net was showing that it's for that light colored fabric, so that when that ink prints onto the fabric, it actually dives into the fabric fiber. It almost becomes like a sublimated print because the ink is not sitting on top. It's actually in the fabric. And when you drag your hand across that fabric, you feel nothing. It's fantastic. And the reason that is because there's very low solid content, a lot of water. It's liquefied. It goes right on top. I mean, it goes right into the fabric. Now, if we go to the polar opposite extent of a chemistry, into what some of you have heard, high solids acrylic, that's the polar opposite. That's got a lot of solid content, a lot of content that's sitting in the ink. Do you have a high solid print there, Annette, that you can pull out? And what that means is that the ink is no longer going to dive into the fabric. It's going to sit right on top like a plastisol. And you see there, you got that big bright white and that bright orange sitting on a dark fiber because it's sitting on top just like plastisol, but with the advantage of a super smooth surface. We're going to explain in a minute. So you got 2 opposite extremes. You got low solids with a lot of water for it to dive in. And then you got the high solids, a lot of content of solids to sit on top, very little water. Now, all those 3 chemistries give you advantages and disadvantages, right? So the advantage of a low solids is you got that 0 touch, no hand surface whatsoever. But unfortunately, you're going to lack opacity. So the minute you go into a dark shirt with the low solids, you're not going to see anything. If you're using discharge, great. It goes through the dryer. You're going to see the colors nice and bright with zero touch, super soft. Unfortunately, not going to work on polyester or some polyester blends. So advantage, disadvantage. Now, if we look at pigment load, how much pigment, how much colorant can each of these chemistries take? Well, because there's little here and more here, then that means that the maximum pigment load for a discharge or a standard water base is 6%. if I go to the polar opposite extreme, a high solids can take twice as much. It can take 12%. So basically, you have more of a solid more of a high solid content. Mike, I saw your question about printing on manual press. I'll get to that in just a short minute. And so with that being said, because of the pigment load, you can go 6 here, 12 here, and the medium goes 9. So that more pigment gives you more opacity, right? And then lastly, before I get to Mike's question about printing manually, is because there's more water here, the tendency of evaporation, and the biggest problem that people complain about is that the ink dries in the screen, is going to be far less. There's so much water in here. The fact that you're going to struggle with it drying in your screen is going to be far less than someone printing with high solids, because there's so much high solids in there, very little water. So if you're getting started with water-based for the first time, or to answer Mike's question about printing manual press, I would highly recommend only working with those products that we offer that are considered low solids. So our Discharge series, our HB series, which is the medium solids, and our Discharge series and our ND Extra series. This would allow you not to have any kind of major problems with this ink drying in the screen and blocking your screen. This is like getting started, training wheels, getting my employees accustomed and not shocked to water-based. This is where you want to start. Only graduate to high solids once you feel confident with controlling water-based inks with medium-low solids. But could you print high solids on a manual? Yes, you can. You have to have a lot more experience, a lot more control on how to control that. If it's your first time working with water-based, I do not recommend working with high solids as a start. Familiarize yourself with the low solids and medium solids. Are far easier to work and the best way to calibrate your stencil. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments about that? About evaporation, opacity, and the chemistries?
Hey, Ivan, I have a medium solids print here as well.
Okay, perfect. And that's a great, the medium solids, and thank you for clarifying that. I didn't touch base much on the medium solids, but the medium solids is the best of both worlds. So it's what we would consider like a semi-opaque. And you can see here, you get the gorgeous details of a low solids because it's very liquefied ink. So it goes through half-tone screens very nicely. Now, with the low solids, if you were to do the lion print with the low solids, you'd lose half the color intensity because it only maxes out at 6%. Whereas with the medium solids, we can go up to much higher at 9%. So we get that opacity through the pigment and through the solid content. So if you're doing half tones on dark shirts, the medium solids is the perfect way to go. You're doing on light fabrics and you want to look for softness, low solids. But anything that's going to be maximum opacity and dark shirts, high solids. Okay. And again, I'm kind of rushing through this for time's sake, but I just want to give everybody with the basics of water-based.
Yeah, I think we're running low on time. Just want to make sure everybody knows that we actually have starter kits available for Magna products that will come with all 3 of these bases, from the low solids to the high solids. Gives you all the pigments that you need. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to GSG or your outside sales representative, and we can help you get started.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to touch base on one more thing. I just saw one question. It says, with water-based inks, will it last longer than plastisol as far as washes after it's printed? Yes, it will. Most of all our products, the core products, the one I'm covering, have to pass rigorous brand testing. There are rigorous testing for Nike and Adidas that have to pass certain standards. It will last just as durable as a plastisol print. Whether it's plastisol or water-based, if the cure is correct, you're going to get a nice, clean print. It's going to last you a long time. Now if we're going to like biodegradable, that's a whole different conversation. But as far as durability of the print, if it's properly cured, whether through plastisol or water-based, it will last just as long. The one advantage with water-based that is an oxymoron that plastisol cannot do, when you wash a water-based print, whether it be a high solids or a low solids, it actually gets softer. It gets softer after wash. Big plus. It goes back to the beginning of this conversation. Why go with water-based inks? The softness level. And whether your customers know it or not, they will touch it and they will say, I don't know what this is, but I don't want that, which is plastisol. I want this. And that's what they're going to say. All right, we're going to touch base on one last thing here, and then we'll kind of leave it up to Q&A. But these are the most frequently asked questions, right? So what does softness really mean? Well, that's an open-ended question, but the best way to answer that is there's two types of softness levels, right? There is what's zero touch and smooth surface, and we just covered it with our chemistry types. So someone says, I want soft, well, you have to, can you explain a little bit what are you looking for? And so the way I would explain is, if you want to drag your hand across a shirt and feel nothing, is that what you're looking for? Yeah, that's what I want. Okay, that's zero touch. I don't want to touch anything. In order for that to occur, the ink actually has to dive into the fabric. And if we look at the picture here, we're seeing the fibers pop through the ink. That's because the ink is transparent. There isn't that solid content to cover the shirt fiber. Now, if someone says, actually, no, I want it to be bright and pop like crazy. Okay, I can do that for you, not a problem. But now the ink has to sit on top. So the zero touch version goes out the window. And now I'm going to offer what's called a smooth surface. As you can see here, similar to your plastisol. Now, the one thing that you could review when you get a chance, look at the softness level. If you zoom in on that high solids. Now, high solids gives you almost like a sticker-like feel, almost like a vinyl cut print, and that's actually screen printed. So that's the significant advantage of a high solids water base over a plastisol. The smoothest surface is night and day versus a plastisol, and therefore that's why more and more printers are gravitating towards water base, specifically the brands. The brands, whether they be the big brand, the big box brands, or even the new and up and coming ones, they gravitate towards water-based, whether it be zero touch or smooth surface, because plastisol is no longer the version that they're going for, okay? So again, just to recap, high solids will provide you the smooth surface and the opacity. HB, the medium solids, and the low solids will give you the zero touch. Right? Any questions in regards to softness levels? Any questions? Let me see. I think there's one direct message. Let me see here. Okay. What about modifiers? Okay, that's a great question. What about modifiers and additives? For the most part, we manufacture all our inks to be a one-pack system, meaning that we do not recommend adding any modifiers to our inks. Retardants, cross-linkers, things like that are all built into the Magna inks. That's one of the biggest advantages we have over a lot of other manufactured water-based inks. Now, are some modifiers required? Sure. The two biggest modifiers that are required is not required on every time, but required meaning that if something should change, that you can add them in there. There's two. One is called a retardant gel, and that specifically is used when it's a hot, dry environment. But typically, you don't need to add it. For the most part, 90% plus of the times, you will not add any kind of retardants to our inks. They're straight out of the bucket. The second one is called a crosslinker, and that's for curing inks at a very low temperature, right? Again, typically not needed because of the fact that they're built in. And then what I'm saying is low temperature is anything that's 280 degrees and lower. Then you would add a crosslinker. But for the most part, not necessary. You can purchase them from GSG, but they purchase on a constant, frequent level. They are not. Only as needed because of the ambient change or because the fabric requires a lower temperature. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. I think I have one more question. Yeah. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Any other questions, comments that anybody wants to add? I can go a little deeper into control. Annette, or Kurt, anything you think I should cover next week? I think we have about another 5 or 10 minutes. We can leave it to open Q&A, whether through chat or direct messages, or I can just kind of fish something out. Let's see. Anybody? Okay, let me just jump over to see what we got here as far as any other thing I can touch right. So I think this is a good recommendation also. So when you're printing water-based printing, and I know someone was saying someone was asking about printing on manuals. You can print on manuals just as you could on automatic, but either way, you have to share the evaporation mentality. So for a plastisol printer, typically they put the ink in the screen and they could sit there for years and nothing's going to happen to it. With water-based, whether it be a low solids or high solids, keep in mind the water is constantly evaporating. Think of laundry. If I launder some shirts and I hang dry them, over a couple of hours, that's going to be bone dry because the water is visibly evaporating. Water-based, when it's sitting in the screen, it's invisibly evaporating. So there's two options here. Some people take what's called the misters, your water misters, right? And whether the ink needs it or not, every so often, every 5 to 10 minutes, in the flood position, when it's flooded, not when it's an open image area, but the flood position, you just give it 3 or 4 pumps, just so that you're neutralizing the evaporation. So in other words, imagine that laundry hanging to dry. My purpose is for it not to dry. And on the contrary, not even to avoid even that middle picture where it's semi-dry. My purpose is to keep that ink soaking wet like that t-shirt. So whether it needs it or not, you just keep hydrating that ink to neutralize the constant evaporation by constantly rehydrating the ink. This will prevent you from having any issues on press. So just as long as someone's circling around constantly hydrating the ink, you will have far less issues. Now, what typically happens is people work with water-based thinking it's with a plasma mentality, and they don't hydrate it for half an hour, 30 minutes. Now the ink goes from a creamy state to like a cookie dough state. Guess what happened? Water evaporated. And now we have to rehydrate even harder. And the ink's out. So as long as just from the get-go, whether you think it needs it or not, keep the ink hydrated. Keep spraying out that water so that it stays hydrated. Any questions about hydration? And again, I'm just kind of touching the surface on this, not to go too far in detail, but just surface level. Questions, comments? Okay, let's see. Anything else you think I should add in that to this, or Kurt? I can try to go one more.
No, I think we're good. I think we're
Okay.
good. We're closing in on time anyway, so.
Great, it's great. Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, your outside rep, GSG in general, or we can get you in touch with Ivan as well. And then please make sure you watch the rest of the session tomorrow. For tomorrow, I think we have one more apparel decoration session today, and hope to see you in the rest of them.